The Valorian High Council chamber was designed to inspire awe in those who stood before it, with soaring ceilings that allowed natural light to cascade down from crystal skylights and acoustics, engineered to make every word spoken from the central platform carried to the farthest corners of the vast Space. Vaughn had stood in this chamber many times before, delivering reports and recommendations, and the occasional diplomatic assessment that the Council used to shape policy across Valorian space, but she had never stood here to say what she was about to say. The 12 counselors watched her from their elevated seats, their crest feathers arranged in expressions of polite attention that she knew masked sharp political calculation, and she felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her lighter than air. They expected a report on precursor technology. They expected evidence of human recklessness and human danger. They expected justification for the restrictions they had already drafted and were simply waiting to implement. Fessor took a breath and began speaking. 3 weeks ago, I accompanied a joint human-Valorian expedition to a precursor installation designated Vault of Silence, she said, and her voice carried clearly through the chamber despite the tremor she could not quite suppress. The Council assigned me to this mission with specific objectives: to document human behavior under stress and to gather evidence supporting the proposed human containment protocols. She paused, letting the formal language settle into silence. I am here to report that I cannot support those protocols, she said, and I am here to explain why. The Council shifted, feathers rustling with surprise and displeasure, but no one interrupted her. During the expedition, I triggered a precursor defense mechanism, Desara continued. I did this despite warnings from the human security specialist assigned to our team. Warnings I dismissed as paranoid and primitive. Warnings that would have saved us all considerable suffering if I had simply listened. She closed her eyes, remembering, in the fraction of a second between my triggering the trap and its activation, Sergeant Dong Kang threw himself between me and the barrage of crystalline shards that would have killed me instantly. He absorbed 7 direct impacts to his torso and 2 to his arms. And he did this without hesitation, without calculation, without any apparent thought for his own survival. The chamber was absolutely silent now. I asked him why. Desara said. I asked him multiple times, in multiple ways, because I could not comprehend how a rational being could make such a choice. And do you know what he told me? She opened her eyes and looked directly at the senior counselor, the one who had pushed hardest for the human containment protocols. He said he did not think about it. He said his body moved before his mind caught up. He said I was in the way of the shards, and he simply reacted, as if protecting a stranger from death was as automatic as breathing, as natural as a heartbeat. Desara felt her crest feathers rising but did not try to control them. We have studied humans for 200 years, she said. We have analyzed their history and their biology and their psychology, and we have concluded that they are dangerous because they evolved on a world that tried to kill them every single day of their existence. And we were right about that. They are dangerous. But we were catastrophically wrong about what that danger means. She stepped forward, closer to the council seats than protocol allowed. Humans do not protect themselves first, she said. They protect others first, their families, their friends, their communities, and yes, even strangers who have treated them with contempt and dismissal, because their survival as a species depended on cooperation, on mutual defense, on the willingness to sacrifice individual safety for collective security. Liaison Vaughn, the senior counselor, began. This is all very dramatic, but I am not finished, Desara said, and the sharpness in her voice silenced him. After Sergeant Kang absorbed those shards, after he should have been dead 3 times over, he continued to guide us through the installation. identifying traps and dangers that would have killed us both. And when we reached the checkpoint that required someone to trigger a gas release system, he volunteered again, even though he knew the gas could kill him. Why would any being do such a thing? Another counselor asked. And the question sounded genuine rather than rhetorical, because he looked at the mathematics and saw that his death would maximize our survival chances. Dasara replied. But here is what I have come to understand. The mathematics were an excuse, a rationalization his conscious mind constructed to explain behavior that came from somewhere much deeper. She turned to address the full council. Humans have a word for what Sergeant Kang did, she said. They call it heroism, and they treat it as something rare and special. But I watched him, and I talked to him, and I have come to believe that heroism is not rare among humans at all. It is simply who they are when they stop thinking and start acting. The senior counselor's feathers had arranged themselves in an expression of deep skepticism. You are suggesting that humans are naturally heroic, he said. That seems contradicted by their history of warfare and violence. Their warfare and violence exist because they fight to protect things they love, Dasara replied. Remove the threat to what they love, and you remove the violence. But you cannot remove the protective instinct because it is woven into every fiber of their being. She thought of Kang, of his confusion when she asked why he saved her, of his simple statement that she was in the way of the shards, of the smile he wore when he walked into the gas, knowing it might kill him. The human containment protocols are based on the assumption that human aggression makes them dangerous allies. Dasara said, I am here to tell you that this assumption is exactly backwards. Human aggression makes them the most valuable allies the Valorian species could ever hope to find, because that aggression will always be directed outward to protect those they consider under their care. She paused, gathering herself for what came next. Sergeant Kang survived, she said. Barely, after 17 surgeries and 4 synthetic organ replacements. He will never operate at full capacity again. His body will carry the scars of what he did for me until the day he dies. And when I visited him in the medical facility to thank him, do you know what he was doing? The council waited. He was reading mission reports, Dasara said, planning his return to duty, looking for the next assignment where he could put himself between danger and the people he was assigned to protect. Because that is what humans do. That is all they know how to do. She reached into the pouch at her belt and withdrew a single feather, long and iridescent, and marked with patterns that every Valorian in the chamber immediately recognized. I gave Sergeant Kang an honor feather, she said, the highest recognition our species can offer, and when I explained what it meant, he seemed confused, not because he did not understand the honor, but because he did not understand why saving me deserved recognition at all. She set the feather on the podium before her. He taught me something in that moment, she said. He taught me what it looks like when someone believes that protecting others is not a choice, but simply who they are. The chamber remained silent as Dasara concluded her report. The humans are not a threat to be contained, she said. They are guardians. They extend the guardianship to species not their own without hesitation, without calculation, without expectation of reward. And we would be fools not to stand beside them. She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting for questions or responses. Her duty complete, her understanding forever changed 3 months later. The human containment protocols were formally abandoned, replaced by a new treaty that recognized humanity as full partners in galactic civilization and on a small moon in a distant system. An ancient installation sat silent once more, its traps reset, its secrets still waiting, its crystalline shards still carrying traces of human blood from the day a man named Do Yun Kang proved that some species are worth dying for, even the ones who do not yet know it themselves. The gas did not kill Do Yun Kang, though it came closer than he would ever admit to anyone, including himself. He felt it burn through his airways like liquid fire, felt it seep into his bloodstream and begin attacking neural pathways that were already struggling to keep him conscious. And for a long moment, he was certain that this was how his story would end. Choking on ancient poison in a tunnel that no human had ever walked before. But his body had other ideas, the same evolutionary heritage that had allowed him to react faster than thought in the chamber above, now kicked into overdrive, flooding his system with adrenaline and cortisol and a dozen other chemicals that humans had developed over millions of years of surviving things that should have killed them. His lungs burned but kept working. His heart stuttered but kept beating. And when the gas finally dissipated, he was still standing with one hand braced against the wall and the other reaching for the release mechanism that would open the path for the others. The mechanism was ancient. Precursor design. A simple lever system that required physical pressure to activate. And Kang pulled it with hands that shook so badly he could barely grip the metal. The security barrier retracted with a grinding sound that echoed through the tunnels. And Dr. Min rushed through with the Sara close behind, both of them wearing expressions that mixed relief with horror at the state of him. "You should be dead," Dr. Min said. And her scanner confirmed what her eyes already told her. "The concentration levels in your blood are 3 times the lethal dose for Valorians and well past the threshold that should cause permanent neurological damage in humans." Kang coughed, tasted copper and something bitter that he preferred not to identify. "Deathworld genetics," he said, and managed something that might have been a smile if his face had been cooperating. "We are harder to kill than we look." The Sara said nothing, but her crest feathers had arranged themselves in a pattern that Kang had never seen before, something that his translator could not interpret and that he suspected might not have a translation at all. They kept moving, because the installation was still active and staying in one place was an invitation to whatever other defensive systems might be warming up in the darkness around them. Kang walked on his own now, which was a lie that everyone present understood, but which no one contradicted, because the alternative was admitting that he should not be walking at all. The tunnels grew narrower as they progressed, designed for maintenance drones rather than organic beings, and they had to move single file through passages that scraped against their shoulders and made the Sara's claustrophobia increasingly obvious. "How much further?" she asked, and her voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with the physical danger they faced. Dormin consulted her scanner, which was having increasing difficulty penetrating the interference from the installation's active systems. "The exit should be just ahead," she said, "but there is something blocking the path." The scanner cannot identify what. They rounded a corner and found out a security drone stood in the tunnel ahead of them, dormant but intact. Its crystalline sensors dark, but its weapons very clearly functional, even after 300,000 years of waiting. Kang studied it with eyes that had grown accustomed to reading precursor design, noting the charging ports along its limbs and the projectile systems mounted on its shoulders and the close combat appendages folded against its torso. "Motion activated," he said quietly. "It will not engage unless we move into its detection range. But the tunnel is too narrow to go around it. Can we disable it?" The Zara asked. "Not without triggering it," Dr. Min replied. "The control systems are too integrated with the weapons. Any attempt to shut it down remotely would register as an attack." Kang looked at the drone, then looked at the tunnel behind it that led to freedom, then looked at the 2 women who had helped him survive this long. The math was simple. It was always simple. "I will draw its fire," he said. "The tunnel opens up about 10 meters past the drone, and if I can keep it focused on me long enough for you to get clear." "No," the Sara said, and her voice was harder than Kang had ever heard it. "You have sacrificed yourself twice already, and I will not allow a third time." "Allow," Kang said, and something in his tone made both women go still. You do not allow me anything, Liaison Vaughn. I am making a tactical decision based on available resources and strategic objectives. And the objective is getting you and Dr. Min out of this installation alive. At the cost of your own life, if necessary. The Sara's feathers rose in what Kong recognized as Valorian fury, and she stepped forward until she was close enough that he could see the individual barbs on her crest. You keep saying that your sacrifice is simple mathematics, she said. That the calculations favor trading your life for ours. But you are wrong. You are so fundamentally wrong that I cannot begin to explain how wrong you are. Kang blinked at her, genuinely confused. The Valorian High Council sent me on this expedition because they wanted proof that humans were what they suspected. Violent primitives too dangerous to be trusted with galactic affairs. The Zara continued. They wanted me to document human aggression and human recklessness and human disregard for proper protocols so they could justify pushing for restrictions on human expansion. She paused, her breathing harsh. Instead, I have watched you throw yourself into danger again and again for a Valorian who treated you with contempt. And every time I ask you why you cannot give me an answer that makes sense, because the truth is that there is no answer. There is just who you are, and who you are is someone who protects others without counting the cost. Kang opened his mouth to respond, but the Zara was not finished. That is not mathematics, she said. That is something else entirely, something my species does not have a word for. And if you die in this tunnel, then that something dies with you, and I refuse to let that happen. The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of the installations, power systems, and the distant grinding of mechanisms that had not moved in geological ages. Dr. Min spoke first. There might be another way, she said slowly, her eyes fixed on her scanner. The drone is motion activated, but the sensitivity threshold appears to be calibrated for precursor biology, which was denser and heavier than either human or Valorian physiology. Meaning what? Kang asked. Meaning if we move slowly enough, carefully enough, we might pass beneath its detection threshold. Dr. Min looked up. It would take time we may not have, but it would get all of us out alive. Kong considered this, considered the risks, considered the certainty of his original plan versus the uncertainty of Dr. Min's alternative. Then he looked at the Zara, at the Valorian who had dismissed him and doubted him and then fought to save him. And he nodded. Show us how slow. He said they moved through the drone's detection zone 1 millimeter at a time. Each step a controlled exercise in precision that made every muscle in Kang's damaged body scream for relief. The drone's sensors flickered occasionally, registering something at the edge of perception, but never quite enough to trigger full activation. And after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they emerged on the other side with the exit visible ahead, the surface access hatch open to reveal stars, and the thin atmosphere of the dead moon, and the most beautiful sight Kang had ever seen. Their ship waiting exactly where they had left. I'd made it 3 steps onto the lunar surface before his legs finally gave out. And the last thing he heard before darkness took him was the Zara calling his name in a voice that sounded nothing like contempt. The Zara Vaughn had lived for 47 standard years, which was young by Valorian standards, but old enough to have learned certain truths about the universe that she had believed were absolute. One of those truths was that no rational being sacrificed itself for a stranger. Mathematics of survival were simple and elegant. Protect yourself first. Protect your genetic relatives second. Protect your flock third. And let everyone else take care of themselves, because the galaxy was too large and too dangerous for any other approach to make sense. This was not cruelty. It was evolution. It was the cold logic of natural selection that had guided Valorian development for millions of years before they ever reached the stars. And Yet she stood now in an ancient chamber, watching a human woman try to lift a human man who should have been dead, whose body had absorbed enough crystalline death to kill a dozen Valorians. And she could not make the scene fit into any framework she understood. Sergeant Donghyun Kang had thrown himself between the Sara and the trap without hesitation, without calculation, without any of the careful cost-benefit analysis that governed Valorian decision-making. Had simply moved, as if protecting her was as natural as breathing, as automatic as a heartbeat. "Help me," Dr. Min said, struggling with Kang's weight. And the Sara realized with a start that the human woman was speaking to her. "I cannot carry him alone. He's too heavy, and we need to move fast." The Sara looked at her own thin arms, her hollow bones, her body that had evolved for soaring through warm updrafts rather than bearing burdens across hostile terrain. "I am not built for this," she said. And the words came out weaker than she intended. Dr. Min's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been desperation. He was not built to absorb crystalline shards for a woman who dismissed his warnings. "And yet here we are," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "So you will help me carry him, or you will explain to the High Council why you let him die in these tunnels after he saved your life." The accusation struck the Sara like a physical blow, and she felt her crest feathers flatten in shame. She moved to Kang's other side and took as much of his weight as her frame could bear. And together, they began the long journey back through corridors that were now actively hostile. Installation had indeed awakened, its systems coming online after 300,000 years of dormancy, and the walls around them hummed with energy that made the Sara's feathers stand on end. Kang drifted in and out of consciousness as they moved. But even in his diminished state, he remained more useful than the Sara wanted to admit. "Stop," he said suddenly, his voice weak but clear, and they stopped. He pointed with a trembling hand at a section of floor ahead of them, at tiles that looked identical to all the others, but which apparently contained some subtle wrongness that only his eyes could see. "Pressure plates," he said. "Along the left wall. Stay right." They stayed right. And nothing tried to kill them. It happened again 2 corridors later, when Kang identified a ceiling vent that would release something unpleasant if they passed beneath it. And again after that, when he spotted hairline fractures in the wall that suggested hidden blade mechanisms. Each time, his warnings proved correct. And each time, the Sara felt her understanding of humans shift a little further from everything she had been taught. "How do you see these things?" she finally asked, when they had stopped to let Dr. Min check Kang's wounds and apply more sealant to the ones that had reopened. "Your species has only been in space for 200 years. You have no experience with precursor technology, and yet you read this architecture as if you built it yourself." Kang's laugh was wet and painful, but it was still a laugh. "Traps are traps," he said. "The species that builds them changes, the tools they use change. But the intent is always the same, to hurt anything that enters. And intent leaves marks that you can learn to recognize." He paused to cough, and when he spoke again, his voice was weaker. "Humans have been building traps since before we had writing, since before we had fire, since the first of us realized that a hole in the ground could catch prey or enemies without any risk to ourselves. And we have been learning to spot them for just as long." The Sara considered this, considered the implications of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history surrounded by dangers both natural and artificial. "Your world must have been terrifying," she said. "It was home," Kang replied, and somehow that simple statement carried more weight than any explanation could have. They reached a junction where 3 corridors branched off in different directions, and Dr. Min consulted her scanner while the Sara tried not to think about how much her arms burned from supporting Kang's weight. "The shortest path to the surface is blocked," Dr. Min said. "The installation has sealed that section." probably as part of whatever defensive protocol activated. But there is an alternate route through the maintenance tunnels. What is wrong with the maintenance tunnels? Kang asked. Because he had learned to recognize the particular tone in Dr. Min's voice that meant she was leaving something out. She hesitated, then showed him the scanner. There is a checkpoint, she said. A security barrier that requires someone to physically trigger a release mechanism while the others pass through. And the mechanism is protected by a gas release system. What kind of gas? The scanner cannot identify it precisely, but the chemical markers suggest something neurotoxic. Dr. Min swallowed. It would be lethal to Valorians. Harmful but survivable for humans. Desara felt ice form in her chest as she understood what this meant. I will do it, she said. And the words came out before she could think about them. Before she could apply the careful cost-benefit analysis that her species prided itself on. Both humans stared at her. The gas would kill you, Dr. Min said. Then it would kill me, Desara replied. And she heard her own voice as if from a great distance. Wondered who was speaking with her mouth. Sergeant Kang has already sacrificed himself once for me. I will not let him do it again. But Kang was already shaking his head, already moving toward the maintenance tunnel with a determination that should not have been possible for a man with 7 crystalline shards fragmenting inside his chest. Your bones would shatter if you fell in that corridor, he said. And his voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. Dr. Min needs to be functional to keep us both alive after I trigger the mechanism. Which means the math only works one way. This is not mathematics, Desara said. And she heard the desperation in her own voice. This is you choosing to die so that I can live. And I do not understand why you keep making that choice. Kang stopped and turned to face her. And despite the blood loss and the pain and the crystalline death working its way through his organs, his eyes were clear. There is nothing to understand, he said. You are alive and I can keep you that way. So I will keep you that way. It really is that simple. He smiled then. A small tired expression that transformed his face into something almost peaceful. Besides, he said, I have survived worse than alien gas in ancient tunnels. And I am too stubborn to die before I see the sky again. He walked into the maintenance tunnel before either of them could stop him. And Desara watched him go with the growing certainty that she had just witnessed something her species had no framework to comprehend. A moment later, she heard the click of the mechanism engaging, heard the hiss of gas being released, and heard Kang's coughing through the fog that filled the corridor, but through the haze. Just before the gas grew too thick to see through, she saw him smile, not the smile of a man facing death, but the smile of a man who knew with absolute certainty that the people behind him would make it to safety. And in that moment, Desara finally began to understand what it meant to be human. The dead moon had no name that anyone remembered. Only a designation in old precursor star charts that the translation software rendered as Vault of Silence, and the human members of the expedition had shortened to simply the Vault. Sergeant Dong Kang stood at the edge of the landing zone and watched the archaeological team unload their equipment into the thin atmosphere, his breath fogging inside his helmet as the environmental systems worked to keep him alive in a place that wanted him dead. He had read the mission brief 7 times on the journey here, memorizing every detail about the precursor installation buried beneath the moon's surface. And each reading had left him with the same uncomfortable feeling in his chest, feeling that always came before something went wrong. The precursors had vanished from the galaxy 300,000 years before humanity ever looked up at the stars, leaving behind ruins and artifacts and questions that no species had ever fully answered. And this particular installation had remained sealed since before the first Valorian learned to fly. Dr. Yesio Min approached him with her scanner already active. her eyes bright with the kind of excitement that made Kang nervous. Because excited scientists often forgot to be careful. "The energy readings are incredible," she said. And her voice carried the wonder of someone who had spent her entire career waiting for a moment like this. "The chamber we identified from orbit is definitely active, which means the power core has been running for longer than most species have existed." Kang nodded but said nothing, his attention fixed on the Valorian liaison who was directing the equipment transport with sharp gestures of her feathered arms. Thessera Vaughn was tall and thin in the way all Valorians were, her hollow bones and light frame marking her as a species that had evolved for flight on a low-gravity world. And she moved with the careful precision of someone who knew that a bad fall could shatter limbs that humans would merely bruise. She had made her opinion of Kang clear during the journey, dismissing human security protocols as paranoid and human caution as cowardice, dressed in professional language. And Kang had learned to simply nod and file his objections in the official record, where they would be ignored until something went wrong. The expedition descended into the installation through an access shaft that the advance team had cleared 2 days earlier, and Kang felt the weight of ancient stone pressing down on him as they moved deeper into the moon's crust the precursors had built to last. Their architecture, a blend of organic curves and geometric precision that no modern species had ever successfully replicated, and the walls around them hummed with power that had outlived entire civilizations. Kang kept his hand near his sidearm, not because he expected to shoot anything, but because the familiar weight helped him focus, helped him notice the small details that others missed. And there were details to notice. The corridor they followed was marked with glyphs that the translation software struggled to interpret, symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on the angle of observation. And Kang saw patterns in their placement that made his skin prickle with warning. "These are defensive markers," he said, his voice cutting through the excited chatter of the science team. "The repetition pattern matches precursor warning systems documented on other sites." Thessera turned to face him, her crest feathers rising in what Kang had learned to recognize as Valorian dismissal. "The precursors marked everything as dangerous," she said, and her translator rendered her words with a sharp edge that might have been natural or might have been editorial. "If we turned back at every warning glyph, we would never have recovered a single artifact from their ruins." Dr. Min looked between them, caught in the middle of a disagreement she did not want to referee. "Sergeant Kang has a point about caution," she said carefully. "But Liaison Vaughn is correct that the warnings are often more theatrical than practical, and the potential value of what we might find could revolutionize galactic medicine." Thessera finished, and there was hunger in her voice. The hunger of a species that had watched humanity rise from nothing to galactic significance in a single century and wanted desperately to reclaim some measure of superiority. "The High Council did not fund this expedition for us to retreat at the first sign of difficulty." Kang recognized the argument for what it was: politics wrapped in practicality. Pressure from above that Thessera could not ignore even if she wanted to. And he filed another objection in the record and followed them deeper into the installation. The sealed chamber they sought lay at the heart of the structure, behind a door that had not opened since before humanity learned to make fire. And the warning glyphs here were dense enough that the translation software simply gave up and displayed them as raw symbols. Kang studied the room while the science team set up their equipment, his eyes tracing the lines of the walls and floor and ceiling, with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read danger in architecture. The floor was wrong. He could not have explained how he knew, could not have pointed to any single detail that confirmed his suspicion. But something about the tiles beneath his feet made every instinct he possessed scream that this was a killing ground. "Dr. Min," he said quietly, moving to stand beside her, "the floor tiles near the door are different from the ones in the center of the room." and the walls have seams that do not match the construction pattern of the corridor. She looked where he pointed, her brow furrowing as she ran her scanner across the surface. "The composition is identical," she said, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty now, though there is a slight variation in the substrate thickness that could indicate hidden mechanisms. Kang finished. "This room is designed to contain something or to kill something, and we are standing inside it." The Sara made a sound that her translator did not bother to interpret. A Valorian expression of frustration that needed no words. "Human paranoia," she said, and she stepped past them toward the sealed door, a light frame barely pressing against the tiles beneath her feet. "The precursors have been dead for 300,000 years, and their traps have been dead with them. And I will not report to the High Council that we abandoned." A sight of this significance, because a human soldier was afraid of the floor. Kang opened his mouth to object, to point out that precursor power cores did not run for hundreds of millennia if the systems they powered were meant to be dead. But the Sara was already at the door, and the science team was already activating the breach protocol. Seal broke with a sound like a giant exhaling. An ancient air rushed past them, carrying the smell of time itself. And Kang watched Dr. Min step forward with her scanner raised and her attention fixed on the treasures that waited inside. He saw the Sara shift her weight, saw her foot descending toward a tile that glowed just slightly different from the others in the ambient light of their equipment. And he understood in a single frozen instant that the trap was not dead at all. His body moved before his mind could form the word to stop her. Time did not slow down for Do-Young Kang in the way that stories often claim it did in moments of crisis. But something happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next that he would never be able to fully explain. His legs pushed off the floor before his brain finished processing what his eyes had seen. His arms reached for the Sara before his conscious mind understood why, and his body twisted in midair with a precision that came from somewhere deeper than training or thought. Valorians would later study recordings of this moment and find themselves unable to comprehend how a human being could react so quickly, how neural signals could travel from eye to muscle fast enough to accomplish what Kang accomplished in that fraction of a second. They would eventually learn that humans had evolved on a world filled with predators that struck without warning, a world where the difference between life and death was measured in milliseconds, and that this evolutionary pressure had created nervous systems capable of acting before consciousness could catch up. But in that moment there was no time for understanding, only for action. Khan's shoulder struck the Zara's chest and sent her tumbling away from the tile her foot had been descending toward, and he heard the click of the pressure plate engaging beneath his own weight as he carried them both toward the ground. The walls came alive, hidden ports opened in the stone with mechanical precision that 300,000 years had not dulled, and crystalline shards erupted from them in a pattern designed to fill the space where the intruder stood with razor-edged death. Kang twisted again, placing himself between the Sara and the barrage. And the first shard punched through his back with a pain so intense that it seemed to exist outside of normal sensation. The second and third followed before he could even register the first. And then there was only the endless rhythm of impact after impact as his body absorbed what had been meant for the Valorian beneath him. 7 shards buried themselves in his torso. 2 more sliced through his arms, and 1 grazed his helmet with enough force to crack the faceplate and send spiderwebs of damage across his vision. He hit the ground with the Sara beneath him, her hollow bones intact, her feathered body untouched. And for a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing and the wet gurgle of blood filling spaces inside him where blood was never meant to bait. Trap reset with a series of clicks and whirs, the hidden ports closing as smoothly as they had opened. And silence fell over the chamber like a shroud. Yesiomen was screaming somewhere behind him, her voice high and tight with horror. And Kang wanted to tell her to stop because the noise was making it hard to think. He needed to think. He looked down at the Sara, who lay beneath him with her crest feathers flattened in what he dimly recognized as Valorian shock. Her large eyes staring up at him with an expression that he did not have the energy to interpret. "Stay," he said, and his voice came out as a wet whisper that hurt to produce. "Down," another breath that sent fire through his chest. "Please." The Sara did not move, did not speak, did not seem capable of doing anything except stare at the human who was bleeding onto her feathers. The Armin reached them, her medical scanner already active. And Kang watched her face go pale as she read the data streaming across her display. 7 penetrating wounds to the thoracic cavity, she said. And her voice had gone flat in the way that voices did when the person speaking was trying very hard not to fall apart. 2 to the upper extremities, significant vascular damage. Possible cardiac involvement. She stopped, swallowed, continued. "Dalian, you need to stay still. You need to let me stabilize you." "The trap," Kang managed. "Is it?" "I do not care about the trap," Dr. Min said. And now her voice cracked, and he could hear the tears she was fighting. "I care about keeping you alive long enough to get you back to the ship." But Kang shook his head, which was a mistake because it made the world spin and sent fresh agony through every damaged part of his body. "If you move me before the trap is fully disarmed, it might trigger again," he said, and each word cost him something he was not sure he could afford to spend. "Check the mechanism. Make sure the reset is complete. Then you can move me." The Sara finally found her voice, though what emerged was barely louder than a whisper. "You took the impact," she said. And the translator rendered her words with a flatness that might have been its own failure to comprehend. "You saw the trap and you put yourself between me and the shards. Why would you do that? Humans do not even like Valorians." Kang blinked at her, confused by the question in a way that had nothing to do with blood loss. "You were in the way of the shards," he said, as if this explained everything. As if there was nothing else to say. Dr. Min finished her scan of the trap mechanism and confirmed that the system had returned to standby. That moving Kang would not trigger another barrage. And she immediately began applying emergency sealant to the worst of his wounds. The sealant burned where it touched raw flesh. But Kang welcomed the pain because it meant he was still alive enough to feel things. "The shards are precursor design," Dr. Min said. And her hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as her voice shook. "They fragment inside the body to cause continuous damage, like thorns that keep breaking off. And I cannot extract them here without proper surgical equipment." Kang nodded, which was still a mistake, but he kept making it anyway. "How long do I have?" he asked. And it was not really a question. Dr. Min did not answer immediately, which was answer enough. "We need to get you to the ship," she finally said. "We need to get you to a real medical facility. We need to—" "How long, Yesio?" She met his eyes, and he saw the truth there before she spoke it. "Hours if we are lucky," she said. "Less if we are not." The Sara made a sound that did not translate. Something raw and broken that seemed wrong coming from a Valorian throat. "Why?" she said again. And this time, the word was almost a plea. "You knew the trap was there. You warned us, and I did not listen. I stepped forward anyway. Why would you sacrifice yourself for someone who did not listen to you?" Kang felt consciousness beginning to fray at the edges, felt the darkness waiting to pull him under. But he fought to stay present because he sensed that this question mattered to her in ways he did not fully understand. "I did not think about it," he said. And the honesty of the statement surprised even him. "There was not time to decide. I just saw you falling toward the tile, and I moved. My body knew what to do before my brain caught up." He paused, coughed, tasted copper. Is that not how it works for Valorians? The look on the Tsar's face told him that it was not. That whatever instinct had driven him to throw himself into the path of crystalline death was something her species did not possess. And Kang realized dimly that he had just shown her something about humanity that she had never seen before. The installation's lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the blood pooling beneath him, and Dr. Min's scanner emitted a warning tone that made her face go even paler. The trap was not an isolated system, she said, and her voice carried the particular terror of someone who had just realized that the situation was worse than she thought. It was a trigger. Something else is activating. The whole installation is waking up. Kang looked at the corridor they had entered through, then looked at his own broken body, and understood with perfect clarity that he could not walk. "Then you need to carry me," he said, "and we need to move now."